but there's definitely a software or hardware device, but there's another 50% that has to come from the PT's habits to be able to build these codes.
Well, hey, Matt, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Rafi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and talking about remote therapeutic monitoring. But before we dive into that topic, just tell us a little bit about yourself, what got you into RTM, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to share. It's been a really interesting journey for myself and for my family too. Background to it. So I'm a physical therapist. Began practicing in '08, always in the outpatient realm. Um, Working for another company in different roles where maybe I helped open up a clinic for a company or was a director there, but never in the owner seat, if you will. And my wife is a PT as well. We were both working full time out in Oregon. Loved it. We're doing great with it, but we found ourselves missing our kids a lot as our kids were growing. So at the time, we made a kind of a radical decision. My daughter, 6 years old, and my son, 3 years old. We decided to find life now. So we sold everything
Oh,
and we
wow.
became travel PTs. Yeah. So pretty big step and a little scary, but there was things in our life that were leading up to this all along, and so glad that we took that risk. So that was in 2019, and we've been full-time RVing now for the last 3.5 years. And we set it up where she would do a contract, for 13 weeks, and I would homeschool and do stuff cool with the kids. And then we'd take about 6 weeks in between contracts where we'd see the nation and see some awesome stuff. And I would do the contract, she would homeschool. So it was the spring of 22 where we went back to Oregon, and I took a contract with my buddy who I worked a decade for. He's got 4 clinics out in Oregon and all outpatient private practice, like I mentioned. And they were struggling with the can we keep our doors open to Medicare question, honestly. Their clinics were building in other facets where it became an option to not accept new Medicare patients
Yeah.
because of the decreased reimbursements, right? And so I found myself in a unique position with time, which really no PT has unless they're an animal, like you probably are. Um, and that time is a 4-letter word. I've used it and it's been picked up, but it's so true in the PT world, right? So I said, what can I do from the road to help you out? Is there anything? I was totally unfamiliar with what is remote therapeutic monitoring. And he said, I don't have the bandwidth, the time to try to implement it in these clinics, figure it out first and foremost. So if you can do that for me, we'll come up with a deal. So I had motivation, I had time. I was looking for an opportunity to spend kind of less clinic time and almost selfishly like provide more flexibility for our family to see more and do more quickly.
Yeah.
And so RTM came up. So I spent the summer of 22 just diving in, well, spring and summer, diving into what are these codes? What does it mean? What does it look like to implement it? And found that there was a few steps that needed to be implemented effectively in the clinic. We'll talk about, what the codes mean and that stuff, but there's definitely a software or hardware device, but there's another 50% that has to come from the PT's habits to be able to build these codes. And so finding that gap, both at the clinic level and then software companies trying to figure out how to relay this to on the ground PTs, I formed what I called Osprey RTM consult or Solutions and Consulting. And so I've just been offering my assistance to PT owners to see if they can figure out this world, as well as the software companies to see if I can be of assistance in making their product better on the PT side and relaying this information on how it's going to work to PTs themselves.
Yeah. So we'll talk about like the specific codes and how it can be built, but I guess very, very baseline, when we say remote therapeutic monitoring, what do we mean? And I mean, it sounds pretty straightforward in the name, but like what specifically is remote therapeutic monitoring?
Yeah, sure. In a nutshell, how I would describe it is, and I always start here when I'm discussing this with PTs, because the first objection is something more to do in my busy day. And what I like to tell PTs is it's a nod to our professionalism. Our medicine is exercise, and if we can demonstrate our patients' compliance of taking our medicine through whatever means, and we're given more information based on what they're doing at home, there are codes that have been written that we can now be reimbursed for this. CMS also knows that the compliant patient is the one that gets better, but so is the one that feels like they're getting taken care of. So we as PTs, we're care is part of our job description, and it's what we own as PTs, that we care for our patients. And so we're willing to do those organic things in our day, answer that email, take that call during our lunchtime. So all of those extra communication steps are being recognized too as billable codes. So I think that's kind of the big umbrella description of where this comes and fits into PT world.
Yeah. Well, and it's nice that you mentioned that, because I always tell people, like, a lot of this work seems like it's already being done in the clinic. Like, we are answering those emails, we are sending maybe it's a message, or, like, our home exercise program at the clinic that I run has had secure messaging for years, and we're always shooting messages back and forth to patients. So now we're just taking the stuff that we've done for free for years, and now somebody's saying, CMS is saying, well, that's billable time and that's valuable to the patient, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it feels good. We just go along our professions being knocked and knocked and knocked. And finally, it's like, okay, we're getting that nod of we're legit. Like, our
Yeah.
medicine is legit. And so here you go. And all this extra time that we can't account for in our day can now be accounted for. So it feels good at a professional level. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I guess specifically, let's talk about um, the codes themselves, and then what the requirements are going to be. Because in order to do RTM, you need to there's some specifics around the software or the device that you're using, correct?
Yes. Yeah, right. So it stems off of, are you supplying a device? So what you can think about that is, well, I start with how these codes were written was kind of almost exactly mirrored what was in existence with RPM, remote physiological monitoring. So the analogy I like to give is a cardiac physician gives his patient a device. This device, the cost of it needs to be recouped, the training of it, the patient has to be compliant in using it so that it can change, modify, or reinforce his plan of care, right? So there was codes written for this, and basically they were just mirrored in the therapeutic realm to say, okay, if you're providing a device that is going to bring back objective data as well as subjective reporting of compliance, we can recoup that cost now. So in the description of the device, yes, that device is a word that brings up hardware. It's like a wearable or something that's going to give you motion, but also in the description, device is included as a software. So the software
as a medical device.
As a medical device, right? So, it needs to be registered with the FDA, follow what the FDA has put out in terms of guidelines of what data it's going to capture, compliance, that kind of stuff. So that device, offering that device, is the first kind of code that you got, which is 98975. So that code it's almost like the prescription that the doctor writes to the patient. The patient, he calls it into the pharmacy. The patient doesn't pay anything until he goes to pick up that prescription, and he's given direction on how to utilize it, right? So having that as your thought for the background, when you supply this device to the patient, they don't get charged for it until they pick it up. So if they log into their software or they use that program first, that first day of data captured, a clock starts. So that clock is going to count months and days, but the 7.5 code, you've trained them, they've logged in, they've attempted to. As long as you're monitoring their compliance or their non-compliance for 16 days, that first code, the 98975, can be billed, but it's only billed once in an episode of care. So Susie Smith's script for her shoulder pain, she comes in, you engage her in this way, 98975 can be billed as long as the plan that she's working with you during that 16 days has transpired.
Yeah, and
So
you
the
don't ever bill
code,
it again. It's
yeah,
not like it's every month you're billing this 98975.
that's correct. The way I interpret it too is if Susie Smith comes in 6 months for knee pain script, it's a new episode of care. She's
Yeah.
been discharged for her shoulder one. You're engaging her again, so the 7.5 is eligible to be billed in that case too. So that clock ticking, those days that are going by, 30 days, every 30 days you can bill another code, 98975, and that's kind of recouping the cost of the device, if you will, but it's showing the patient using it. So the standard that CMS has put out there is 16 of those 30 days. So just a little bit more than every other day your patient is doing their exercises. They're engaging in what you've provided them to get some compliance, to get some objective data back. Every 30 days during the plan of care, this code is a billable code as long as the patient has registered 16 timestamp days. So what does that mean? That works super well to keep your patient motivated as they're building a new habit and you've started them. Eval, they need to get going with 2 times a week for 4 weeks. Then I'm going to drop them down to 1 time a week. Then I'm going to go into a maintenance program. Every one of those stages of that plan of care, this is a billable code as long as that patient's reaching those 16 touches, if you will.
Yeah. And that's the 98977.
Correct. Yeah. And I've come to call those kind of the low-hanging fruit because what needs to be provided is the device, the PT's awareness of just encouraging that patient, like in clinic space time, and then the habit building. I mean, I think that's what the code is about, is that habit building for that patient, that they're doing it and getting involved. That's what is required to be able to build those codes. So at very least, those should be something seen as, look, we're doing our job in prescribing a good home exercise program. We're modifying it. We're adjusting it based on progression or regression as necessary. But it's another weapon in our, another arrow in our quiver where we can say, hey, look, Susie, this is going to work. Let's get after it. Let's stop making excuses for not doing your work. And that is really what we're doing all along. So as long as you're capturing some of that data, those are billable codes. Yeah.
Awesome.
So then there's 2 other codes in the outpatient PT world. So that 98977, let me backtrack. That can be billed. All these codes can be billed by occupational therapists, speech, language pathologists, and PTs, as well as physicians can bill these codes too.
Falls under that
so
qualified healthcare professional or whatever.
Right. So and assistants can bill these codes as well. There is, reductions based on a PTA building versus a PT. We can get into that if there's questions that come up at some point. So then the other 2 codes that come along are the 98980 and 81. And what I like to suggest as a picture is the first of every month, you get unlimited buckets. The first one says 98980, and that is to capture all that organic time, maybe some focus time now that it's a billable code. But we fill that bucket up with modifying their home exercise program, tracking their progressions, sending an email, internal messaging, but at least one synchronous conversation has to take place to completely fill that bucket. So you might have 17 minutes of all of this other stuff that happens electronically, but you have to have at least one phone call, video chat, something like that, where you're discussing simultaneously with the patient something about their care. That adds up. Past 20 minutes, you can bill that first 80 code. All the subsequent minutes that happen in a month spill into a bucket called 81, 98981. And though you have unlimited amount of those, On the 31st of the month, they get dumped and they're all
They
ready to
start
be
over
filled
again.
again on the first of the next month. Yeah. So that's a solid description and starting place for each code, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that I know this can be a hang up too. The way, like, when you can build these and the, like, when the time clock resets, like the setup code starts from, that clock starts when you start the patient on the remote therapeutic monitoring. But that 9-8, those 8-1s and 8-0 codes, like, are calendar months, right? So, like, if you eval somebody on, you know, I know today's the 28th, like, that clock is resetting in 3 days, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it gets goofy. So you're not going to get all the codes every single month because
Yeah.
there's that overlap, even if you're going 100% at it. It's just the timing doesn't add up there. And in just the definition and how we've described it, if you're a solo practitioner and you've got, a limited caseload, by all means, get your spreadsheets out, start tracking this stuff. If you've got a couple clinics that you're working for, and so you've got hundreds of patients rolling through, it will super quickly become a hindrance to your
Yeah.
day to try to track all these patients and figure it out. And so that's in turn what is being offered at the software level is this tracking for you to trigger your next move in terms of billing or action and compliance for that patient to get those codes in. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got the codes now. They're kind of defined.
Yep.
Um, maybe, like, walk through, like, a case, maybe one scenario of, like, when, like, at what point in the course of care we would build these codes. So Susie Smith comes in, she's got a referral for a shoulder. Day one, PT sets her up on this software, and we're off to the races.
Yeah. Sweet. So here's another thing, and it's going to hinge somewhat based on what EMR you're using
Yeah.
and how it accepts codes. And I say that because each one of these codes is untimed, right? It's not something that happens for 8 minutes on a date of service that you can bill for. It's a collection of time over a span that's dictated by CMS. So if your EMR allows you to code these without a given treatment day, brilliant. That's a good time. That's a good way to figure out where and when you're going to build those. So those open up for a clinic space to almost kind of batch bill, if you will.
Yeah.
You utilizing whatever software or whatever you set up to track all this stuff to go through and push these attached to the patient's case. For the PT mind, for the staff PT, what I suggest is an awesome trigger for these codes is to think, you know, let's just start with somebody that walks in at the beginning of the month for your eval. You train them, you set them up, you send their HEP electronically, you hand them the device, whatever they're going to record on. Day one, you've educated them. Okay, great. So that code, the 98975 code, kind of sits waiting to be billed. All right, so that's kind of often in the background. You've done your due diligence. 16 days has to lapse before you can bill that. So it's just kind of sitting there in the bank. So day 2 through day 25, you're working with the patient 1, 2, maybe 3 times a week, whatever you've got them set up on, and you're encouraging them. You kind of, whatever device you're using, you're taking a glance at it while you're in the clinic with them, starting to add some of the time that happens in communication with them into the 8-0. And so as you're going, you're encouraging them, and then progress report time rolls around, right? If the 30-day research have to happen, call it what you want to. 30 days, you got to do that progress report. Okay, so 30 days comes up. Now I can look back and see Susie Smith, what she's accomplished. 7.5, yes, you educated her. She logged on a couple times. 16 days is definitely elapsed. That's a billable code. Has she gotten her 16 out of 30 days where she's interacted with the system? Yes, then that's a billable code. So progress report time is a good time to trigger the PT into thinking, okay, are these billable codes have they completed this work to build these codes.
Yeah. And it's just part of the reeval for them. They're just going through, oh, okay, and now we're here. It qualifies. Boom, drop the codes, call it
Yeah.
a day.
Yeah. And so when I'm working with clinics, I suggest that to start there, put the role in put this duty in the PT's hand, especially if, you're a clinic of 1 to 5 practitioners or something like that. If you're at 5 plus in a clinic space, it might be wise to figure out how to make that EMR work for you. And twice a month, one of your PTs or the director has time set aside where he goes through and he just runs through who's met the codes and pushes those through the EMR at that time, with the supportive documentation, obviously. So, yeah,
Okay.
I hope that kind of helped. Yeah,
no, that makes it a lot of sense. Yeah. So, I guess we've talked about kind of the billing, what you need to have in place. How does this work from the patient perspective? Like, I guess we'll call it a patient engagement standpoint, but have you noticed doing this with all these clinics, like, is this increasing or decreasing no-show rates or increasing compliance because you're getting sometimes you're getting notifications or emails or pings from your therapist saying, hey, I noticed you haven't done your exercises in 4 days, your appointments tomorrow, or whatever. Like, is this making changes? And I'm sure we're too early into have a lot of data, but from, I guess, anecdotally, is it improving patient engagement, adherence, all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, as a whole, it is. The initial response, because we're dealing with people,
Yeah.
don't forget, these are still people, right? You're going to have your compliant folks, you're going to have your non-compliant folks. So you're not going to be able to bill 100% on all the folks that you're working with. I mean, let's be real. And then drive that realness into another stage. A lot of these folks, and we judge the book too quickly, but these folks, because the bread and butter right now is Medicare, Med Advantage, federally funded, they're over 65. But don't judge that book too quickly, because the average age I bill on when I'm working this RTM side for my buddy is 74, right?
Oh, okay.
So it's like,
yeah,
that's average age. That's kind of a cool stat to throw out there. So folks are getting it. They're doing it. Yes, some of them see it as another thing just to do. But as it transpires and there's some value gained in terms of an extra talking point with the PT in the clinic,
yeah,
a little extra guidance, hey, how you were doing when they weren't expecting it. Like, these folks are doing it now, and it's very refreshing to just have a few conversations with people, and often I'll get something similar to, Matt, once I got past it's an extra thing to do, I really valued it. I have done PT in the past, and I'd end up with 5 sheets of paper that had coffee stains on them. I'd lose 2 of them, not
on the
remember if I should
floorboard of
still
your car
continue to do the first
somewhere.
one. Yeah, exactly, right. So you're like, okay, so that's one value. It's all in one place. It's all a good option. It's going to be saved. The other value is when they get past that, it's the one more thing to do. Their honesty improves, so their compliance. So they say, Matt, maybe I'd rush and do my exercises the night before my PT appointment so I could tell my PT I did them. But now that I know that somebody's kind of checking it and my PT is going to be checking it, like, I'm more frequently doing my exercises, and guess what? I'm getting a little bit better. The From the compliance thing, I think you kind of meld into what benefits there are in the PT side of things, where just purely doing your exercises, the PTs are like, I don't have to show Jim Bob how to stretch his calf for the first 20 minutes of my session anymore, because he's
Exactly.
doing it at home. He's figured it out. This is great. As well as less, I call it patient ghosting. Kind of like, you got this patient scheduled out for 6 weeks. Week 3 comes up, they get sick, they cancel, then they don't show up for their next appointment. Then all of a sudden, like,
3
they're
weeks
off the
goes by.
radar
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah. So they're kind of being held more accountable. So we're seeing less of that patient ghosting, if you will. Follow throughs with the full plan of care. Yeah, there's a good amount of that happening too. And then from the PT side of thing too, which was cool. In my case study, I had 4 clinics that I'm doing this for underneath one company umbrella, purely doing the RTM implementation and billing contact points for the on behalf of the PTs that are in this clinic. Okay. So I'm doing that as well as training and implementing this in other clinics out in the country. But when I look at and derive my own stats from just these clinics, each clinic has its own personality. And there's the really, really busy clinic. Then there's the fairly busy clinic. Then there's the making it happen at clinics. But those more busy than not clinics that are sweating their wait list trying to get patients in, the PTs can utilize this because the patient still feels like they're getting served,
Yeah.
but maybe they can do a little less frequent. They move into a management progression quicker, if appropriate, use your professional judgment. But the wait list we're popping people into get their evals from the wait list, and that's
Sooner.
going to keep
Yeah.
people happy too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that piece about like from the patient's perspective, like they, a lot of times they do see it as it's just it's another thing I got to log into. But we've noticed in the clinic that I run, and then some of my clients, is like as soon as you begin to like explain to the patient the value, like, oh, there's a secure messaging function here. You can shoot me a message whenever you want, and I'll get to it. I won't be able to respond right away, but I guarantee you we'll get to it sooner than calling and leaving a message on the clinic voicemail or something like that. Like patients really like that. They value the
Ah.
access more than anything else, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they get it. They get it. They really do. And it's worth a try. Like I said, are you going to get 100% of these folks signed in? No, there's going to be some people that are completely adverse to technology, and that's fine. Don't let it be a hindrance to their care. Do what's good for them. But the majority of folks can do it, and when they see those additional features, that they like that chance to let their voice be heard, and that's what you're giving them. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So what are the common, and I'm assuming a lot of this is going to be habitual in nature, but what are the most common like roadblocks when it comes to implementing this in a clinic? Because, a lot of times we've already said, like, we're doing this stuff as clinicians. We are, messaging patients, responding to emails, doing all that kind of stuff. So what's the hurdle then with implementing remote therapeutic monitoring successfully? Because I know there are a few there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the clinic level, all right. So you got this PT. If you're a director listening to this, um, imagine telling your PT that he's got to change his clock from the east facing wall to the west facing wall. Like, you dread doing that because you're going to hear about it for the next 2 months. So if you alter just these little things in a PT, and it's almost a survival strategy that we as PTs kind of find our routine and we just go, right? And it we get so ingrained in our work habits, and that's fine. That's part of what we're doing to make our care happen. It's difficult to implement any little difference. So if you've ever changed over to a new EMR, or you've ever done anything like that, it's a big step. And so a component of that new habit building by the PTs um, is the first big hurdle. But I always suggest, if you're the leader of the company, make sure that the PTs see that it's a nod to their professionalism. It's all we're doing is attending to and recording all that extra stuff that we do that we can now get paid for, right? As long as we are attentive to it. So it's building those work habits into the attention um, intention and attention of these codes, and then they become billable. Um, Finding, given your size of your company, like I said, if you're more than a solo practitioner or two that's running in a clinic in a nice knit, you're gonna want to look for something that is capturing this. So then you as the leader have to go through the process of figuring out what's going to do it best for my company, just like choosing a new EMR, a new billing system, that kind of stuff. Um, so those are the two big hurdles: figuring out what you're going to use and getting that habit built. And I would say it takes about 3 months for a clinic to kind of build that habit um, all around. And when I do extra training, or I'm thinking about actually offering some courses, what I like to say is it shouldn't be a selling job by the PT. So I
Yeah,
train the front desk staff first, so that when the patient comes in, they're already expecting something like this.
exactly.
Then
Yeah.
their PT says, okay, I'm not going to print it. Here it comes, and sends electronic whatever access. Um, then it can go from there, and then it's just attention from the
Yeah.
PT.
Yeah, it's super big. Like it almost even including it in like the new patient paperwork or new patient email that goes out.
Correct.
Like, oh, by the way,
Yep.
here's the link for your intake paperwork, and here's some information about the platform we use to deliver or to monitor, whatever you want to call it, so that the patient knows about it when they come in. They're like, what is this? I thought I was going to get a paper.
100%, man. You hit the nail on the head. And you know, part of my offerings to try to help consult people through this implementation process, like I compiled so that to try to make the easy button as big as possible, where there's templates in that vein all over the place that you're free to use and change to your own style and put your logo on. But that's exactly right. New patient paperwork, an attendance agreement modified to say RTM agreement, you know, emails, templates that can automatically go out to the patients too, to encourage this and continue to reinforce it, to take the load off the PT in the space and to take the load off of your shoulders to try to implement it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned this a couple times, trainings, courses, all of that. How much training should like just a clinic owner or director plan on for their clinicians and admin staff to do this? You already said about 3 months to get it up and running, but is this something that you got to like carve out a couple days to train, or is it something you can do over several staff meetings, or is it more effective just kind of, you know, as one of my former business partners used to say, kind of build the plane as you're flying it, you know, like kind of on the job training?
I would say a mix of both, but definitely not 100% of your latter statement.
Yeah.
Because you'll never get around to making it proving its importance, I guess, to the staff. So what I suggest is 3 hours, an hour meeting for each group, leadership, how we're going to run this, what verbiage do we want to use, and let's get the background stuff built into the EMR and the billing system. Okay, that's one meeting. Second meeting, front desk staff, here's the flow when a new patient comes in. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. Here's how you kind of help find a patient's new password creation if you want to, so that, you know, that's something that they can do in behalf of the PT. And then one hour meeting, you know, same week if you want to, with the PTs, where it's, this is what the codes are, this is how you do it, here's how you're going to optimize your guys' solution, your device. Let's go and start. So once that happens, okay, that'll probably happen over the course of 2 to 4 weeks. So that's the first month, right? Then the PTs are knowledgeable. They start to practice and start to enroll their patients in the next month in RTM. So homework, I like to give homework to the PTs and say, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, each one of you enroll 5 patients, you know, in RTM. So because it's over time that these codes take place, that's why I say the third month. So now you're enrolling these patients. The third month, we can look back and we can start to bill on these patients.
Yeah.
Right. And then Medicare's probably the quickest in terms of reimbursement. So you're looking at, you know, 3 to 4 weeks to see what money's coming in, and then kind of changing from there. So follow-ups in there, yes, but a couple 1 hour meetings and you got the job done, you got the groundwork laid, and then it's just refinement from there.
Yeah.
So then you are kind of continuing to build the plane. It can fly, but you're figuring out how to make it faster, you know, after a couple months.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think the big thing that throws, well, some people off too, is like the idea that we're doing all this work on the front end, and you, like you said, you're billing after 16 days, after 30 days, whatever. So it does take some time of, once you implement it too. I'm a numbers guy, I'm a data guy, I like my dashboards.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a little bit of time for you to see kind of the uptick either in revenue or in patient engagement, whatever it is, even as you're tracking it, because there's a little bit of a delay. It's almost like a lagging indicator of how the program is going.
It is. Yeah, it is a very much a lagging indicator. And because it's lagging in patient's response time, so that time has to elapse, then the billing has to happen, and then the reimbursement has to happen. But it's got a rollover effect too.
Yeah.
So it's one of those tough things where it's difficult to calculate truly finite numbers. You know, that's what a clinic owner wants to know at the end of the day. What's the ROI?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like, well, you might have a slow month, but you might have a huge month. And when do you see and reap the rewards of those huge months of numbers coming through? So you do your best with averages. And so when you average out, just because I'm going there with the numbers, I might as well do that from my end. When you average out compliant patients, so you look at maybe a three month plan of care, people are going to drop off. Some people aren't going to engage all the time. So you try to average out per patient, and being fair with what I thought was number of times each code would be billed on the conservative end, you're probably looking at averaged out over everybody between $130 to $160 per patient
Yeah.
for a 3 month plan of care. So that's extra. And I think that that's kind of agreed upon by those that are doing it and what the numbers that they're seeing. For the super compliant patient, yeah, you're going to earn more, but keep in mind, you're going to have folks that
They just drop off.
can't,
Yeah.
won't, don't drop off, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool deal. Well, we're getting near the bottom here. So this has been very, very helpful and informative. If there are
Good.
one or two main takeaways you'd want maybe a clinic director or a clinician and somebody that's thinking about implementing remote therapeutic monitoring in their clinic, what would those two main takeaways be?
Awesome. So I think we are seeing this, those that have been in the RTM game kind of since the codes were written, right? CMS writes something new. How long is it going to last? That's the first
Yeah,
question you got to ask yourself,
exactly.
because every 6 months, every year, it changes. This has stuck around with minimal change for a second year, and it's going to probably incur minimal changes for a third year. So this is around, and I only have to proposition the fact that it's going to morph into something bigger, but in the direction of some kind of hybrid care. I
Yeah.
think that this is the first step. Being a clinic PT and knowing the value of having face-to-face conversation, if I have any voice in the matter for as long as I consider myself a PT, I'm going to fight tooth and nail for the in-person visits to always be a part and always be seen as value. But I think this is going into some degree of hybrid care. So CMS wrote it, other insurers are starting to catch on. And the two next big players that I can't imagine, well, workman's compensation, like they
Yeah,
want
I
to
mean,
know
they were
every
talking about
visit.
remote therapeutic monitoring in early 2000s. They're like, well, how can we make sure our patients are compliant?
So correct. So correct. So they love that stuff. So they have got to be the next one on. And I'm getting some news. They take a little longer to get reimbursement back from, right? But getting some good news in that department, I should say, too. So we're seeing the trend to more and more commercial third-party payers
Yeah.
picking up on these. So it's gonna be there. So the one takeaway would be, if you're considering it, do it. And just like the old adage is, don't do anything half-assed,
Yeah.
if I can say that, like,
You can. Yeah.
because if you just said, okay, we're going to do this, and you tell a few folks about it in your clinic, it's not going to get done, because it's a new habit that has to be trained into the staff to be effective. I fully believe that.
Yeah. You
With
almost
that
just
being said,
implement it
go
with
for it.
everybody, every single patient.
I know.
Some payers are going to deny it, and that's fine. You're not getting paid for that time
Right.
anyways, but at least you're getting the habit of
Correct.
doing it.
100%. I make that suggestion. The soft start or the pilots that want to go through, like I suggest, if I'm getting that vibe, I say, okay, go with your bread and butter, make it a Medicare Med Advantage thing. Fine, that's fine. Just go for it. And then once you guys are in that habit, try to roll it out to everybody. So yeah, you can go all in, you can go soft start that way, but the understanding and the training up front is going to count for a lot, because if you just flounder for a couple months, it's not going to go anywhere. It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You won't see the ROI. You're like, what's the point?
Correct.
Awesome.
That would be one big takeaway that comes out
yeah,
off
no,
the
that's a
top of my
huge
head.
one. I think that's great.
Mhm.
Matt, where can people find out more about you, more about Osprey, working with you, and maybe those forthcoming courses you've teased us with?
Yeah, I know, right? I need to, well, time's a 4-letter word for me still, um, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook page, but Osprey RTM Solutions and Consulting. I do have a landing page that maybe you can put in the footnotes or
Yeah,
something
we'll
like
link
that.
to it.
It's to give you a solid web address for that. I am on the beginning stages, so it's a free Wix site, right? So
Yeah.
it's like my
Hey,
last name, whatever they want to put in there until I
minimal
pay them
viable
to.
product, baby.
Right, that's right. So go look at that. There's more information that you can find, different podcasts or walkthroughs that I've done in terms of webinars. And then let's just talk. Just
Yep.
contact me through one of those means. That's fine. Let's just talk, guys. Let's get educated about it, because I fully believe it's props to our profession, and it's going to help us get a foothold in future medical care as PTs. Honestly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Cool deal. Well, Matt, thanks so much. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, Rafi.